Good morning, Willowbrook. My name is Bobby Ann Allen, and I'm so glad you are doing these daily devos with us as we look through the story of Scripture and we discover more about who God is, how He interacts with His people. And today we do that in Deuteronomy chapter 28. In this 28th chapter, we find Moses making a prediction of the future of Israel. He talks about blessings, he talks about curses, but what he talks about is the conditions around these blessings and curses. Read with me in the very first verse. It says, "Now if you," this is talking to Israel, "faithfully obey the Lord your God, and you are careful to follow all of His commands I'm giving you today, the Lord your God will put you far above all the nations of the earth." This is an if-then statement. If you're faithful to obey all the commands, then God is going to raise up the nation of Israel above all the earth. The chapter goes on to tell us about prosperity promised to the nation of Israel. In fact, it also talks about the curses and the destruction that happens when they don't follow God, when they aren't faithful to be obedient. Now, this can be a bit confusing because here in the Old Testament, people were functioning very much on a system that involved their own self-righteousness. And because of their own righteousness, they would get a place of right standing with God. There would be consequences, there would be blessing based off of their actions. Now, what does that have to do with us now that we aren't Old Testament Christians? We fall under a new covenant with God, where the blessings in our life come not because of our own self-righteousness, but it comes under the righteousness of Jesus. We receive salvation. But we also have consequences for our actions. There are blessings, there are curses based off of choosing to do things God's way. In fact, sometimes what happens is we'll read a chapter like chapter 28 in Deuteronomy, and we'll see these promises of material blessings, and we think that material blessings equal blessings. But we find throughout Scripture, in fact, a lot of times, I'd like you, if you want to go with me to Romans chapter 8, there's a really famous verse that talks about a different kind of blessing. A blessing for those who love God and who are called according to His purpose. This is what it says in Romans 8:28. "We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God and those who are called according to His purpose." This is a different kind of prosperity. This is a spiritual prosperity that because of a trust and obedience in God, we can have a peace and a joy because God is working things out for good. Now, that's a different kind of prosperity, one that if we don't choose God, if we don't choose God's way, we are depleted of joy and peace. But when we choose God's way, it tells us in chapter 28 of Deuteronomy that He opens the storehouses, and He does the same thing for us. In fact, I'm skipping back and forth a lot, but in Romans 8:31, it tells us that if God is for us, who can be against us? There are blessings and there are consequences when we choose to obey God or when we don't choose to obey God. And sometimes we look for those in what's happening around us. We look at our circumstances and decide whether or not we are blessed or not blessed. But because of the work of Jesus, God promises us those who love him, those who are called according to his purpose, will receive a spiritual blessing of joy and peace because we know that God works everything out for his good and for our good of what he is doing in our lives, in the lives of those people around us. And our job is to trust God, not to be the ones who control the results, but those who trust God that he has a big picture, he's up to something, and we rest in who he is, his power, and that he loves us and blesses us abundantly. I hope that you'll have a happy Wednesday.